Hello, it's Casey. We're going to be working on a wirework bracelet today, and it's a type of channel setting that we're going to be doing, and it's a channel set that doesn't have the wire at the back. So generally channel setting with wire, you end up with a piece of wire in between up the back there, but this is done with two wires. So we're going to be working with two lengths of our weaving wire, and we're going to be passing through those beads to create a really neat, beautiful channel set. So we'll also go ahead and make the clasp as well, which is a nice little simple demo just at the end of the video. And it's a nice one to learn to incorporate into lots of different designs too. So we'll move on to what we need. So we're going to be needing quite a few different gauges of wire to create this piece. And the ones that we're going to need is some 1.25 bare copper wire, some 0.9mm bare copper wire, and some 1mm bare copper wire, and some 0.4mm bare copper wire. You can alter the gauges slightly if you haven't got these exact ones. You could replace your 1.25 with 1mm for instance, if you haven't got that thicker gauge, or you can replace your 0.9mm for maybe a 0.8mm depending on what you have. So the other things that we're going to need is some seed beads. So I'm using, for the demo, I'm just going to use the one colour seed beads. For this one I've used two colours. You're going to need something to maybe hold your wires for you. So I'm going to be using either a ring clamp or a piece of tape. So whatever you've got to hand. And the tools that we're going to be using are some round nose pliers, some six-step baling pliers, some flush cutters, and some chain nose or narrow flat nose pliers. Okay, so I'm going to move all this out of the way and we'll get started. So let's talk about what wires we're going to need first of all. So for the outer of each of the outer sides of the bracelet, I've used a 1.25. Now I prefer to use a thicker wire on the outside, and that's because it's going to give you that extra strength, and it gives you that really lovely flash of the metal as well in between, and gives it another design detail. So we're going to be using two pieces of our 1.25 wire, that's top and bottom. And these are around about 9 inches each in length. And then we're going to use 4 pieces of our 0.9mm wire, and those are also about 9 inches in length. We're going to use our size 8 seed beads. I'm using Miyuki seed beads. I will pop the link down below in the details. And we're going to be using some 0.4 wire. Now for demo purposes, I'm going to be using a lot shorter lengths just because it's a lot of wire to work with, and I would suggest when you're actually making this yourself to actually work over your lap rather than against a flat surface, because there's a lot of wire to deal with and it's easier if it just hangs down. But obviously I can't do this because I'm recording. So you're going to take 2 lengths of your 0.4 wire. Like I said, mine are just short for demo purposes, and each of these lengths is going to be 1.5 meters, so 1.5 meters long each. It's not as daunting as it sounds. It is quite easy to work with. So to start with, let's get going. So we're going to take we will be using the ring clamp, but just in a second. We're going to take our outer wires, and 2 of our 0.9. So we're going to work with one side and then the other just to begin with. And I'm going to pop my wire in underneath the thickest wire. So this is a 1.25 wire. And I'm going to pop my wire in just underneath, leaving a little length at the end. So this is going to create our detail at the end, and my wire underneath. So, and I'm going to create a couple of anchor wraps. So my wire's attached there. I've got those nice couple of anchor wraps. Or if you wanted to add a little bit more detail, you could make that maybe, let's say, 5 wraps. So then we're going to start with 5 and we'll end with 5 at this end. So this is what I've done on this one. So they've just got that little bit more detail at the end to have them extra wraps. Okay. So with this one, this is going to be the bottom. So we're going to work upwards. So I'm going to add my next piece of 0.9 wire on top. So it's going to come on top of that tail wire. And I'm going to wrap over 2 times over 2 wires. So over once, over twice, and then come up in between those 2 you just wrapped and push those together. So we've got 2 wraps over 2 and my wire's coming out in between those 2 wires. Then I'm going to pop on my next piece of 0.9 wire, level them up, and again 2 wraps over 2. So 2 wraps over 2 and pushing them nice and tight together each time, and again up between the 2 we just wrapped, like so. So my wire's coming out towards the top side and it's coming out in between those 2 we just wrapped. So I'm just going to bring that up to the camera and just let that focus. So my wire's coming up in between those 2 we just wrapped there. So now, just keeping that nice and straight, I'm just going to set that side a second and work on the other side. So I'm just going to pop that to one side. So that's our up side. So now we're going to work coming downwards this time. So again, taking your length of, yours will be a lot longer than mine, yours will be 1.5 meters. We're going to work downwards this time. So popping my wire this time on top of this, so on top of my piece of wire, and I'm going to create some anchor wraps. So over, we're going to pop that 5 wraps in, but we're wrapping the opposite way to the way that we started. So I've got those 5 wraps in to start with, and now my wire's coming over the top towards me, and I'm going to put this piece of 0.9 wire in between. So my working wire is going to be on top and my little tail wire is going to be underneath that piece of 0.9, and level them up. And just as we did at the other side, we're going to go 2 wraps over 2 and then come up in between the 2 we just wrapped. And my wire will be coming over the top towards me. I'm going to pop that next wire in again, so just make sure you go over the top of that tail, level them up, and wrapping these bottom 2 wires. So wrapping those 2 over 2 twice, and then coming up in between the 2 we just wrapped, like so. So now we've got both of our sides, so this is the top side, and then we've got this bottom side here, and our wires are coming up. So these are going to meet together. So now we need to add our bead. So we're just going to take either side, just holding them quite gently, and pop on our first bead, so our first size 8 bead, letting that drop down. So this is the top side that I've got here, and then bringing the working thread, the working wire up towards that bead. We're going to pass through that bead with the bottom, so this wire is coming from here down at the bottom here. So just gently pulling that through. We don't want to go too, don't be too rough with it, just making sure that it's all gently put together, lined up, and just working it so that bead's sitting nicely inside and giving that a little bit of a tug, just so that we get that bead sitting nicely. I'm putting my thumb and fingers around them and just pulling the wire so I know I'm supporting everything, and now we can see that bead's inside there. So it's at this point you might want to either add a piece of tape or to start using a ring clamp or something similar. So to use a ring clamp, this is what you'd normally use to set a ring. You would pop your wires inside there, push everything down, and just make sure it's lined up so that you've got that nice gap, which is perfect for your bead to sit inside there. So just take your time, just building this up so that I know that my bead is going to sit in that gap nicely and everything's spaced out together nicely, like so. And then I can just pop the other end into this end and just squish it up like so. And I usually kind of push it against the table too. Okay, so they've splayed out a little bit, but don't worry, we can pull them together. This is just kind of aiding us holding. So now we've got that bead in place, we need to make sure that it's set in place and it's going to stay nice and steadfast in that area. So this time I'm going to work with this bottom wire here, and I'm going to work with the top wire of my bottom set. So this is my bottom set here, and I'm going to be working with this wire. So I'm just going to I'm going to come over the top of that wire, that one single wire, and set my bead in place by adding one wrap on there. So I've just added one wrap on there, and that bead is set nice and tightly into there. And I'm going to do the same with the top one. So I'm going to use my working wire, I'm going to use the bottom one of this top set of wires and just add one wrap around that innermost wire. So that's set that in. Now for just a few seconds we can ignore this top wire. We're just going to work on the bottom set, and we're going to work 2 wraps over 2, so it's kind of like going back to that sort of the basic weave, that zigzag weave. So I will pop a link just at the top there if it's something you've not done before, just to do a really basic big zigzag weave. I'll pop a little link on that. So just working 2 wires over 2 and then coming up in between the 2 we just wrapped and pushing those together and back up to wrap those bottom 2 wires again and over and in between those 2 we just wrapped. So this is just your basic zigzag weave, and just making sure you use the tension in your hand there to pull the wire and pushing as far up as possible. So I'm just going to put those top 2 wraps in. So we're working on the bottom set, so this is the top 2 wires being wrapped together on the bottom set, and then I'll show you what that looks like a bit closer up. So wrap those twice and come up in between those 2 we just wrapped, like so. So I'll just bring that up to the camera so you can see. There we go, so you can see my little zigzags come down and back up. So I've wrapped 2 over 2, 2 over 2 at the bottom and 2 over 2 with those top 2. Now I'm just going to leave that wire and I'm going to work with this top wire. So sorry about the noise, the wire hits my tripod, hence why I'm using such a shorter piece. So wrapping 2 over 2, we've already put that single wrap in to secure our bead. So 2 over 2 in between the 2 we just wrapped at the top, and 2 wraps over the top 2 wires twice, pushing that together nicely. Like I say, it is a lot easier when you're working with, especially when you're working with 2 wires, 2 working wires, to actually work over your lap rather than working on a surface, because the wires will sit on the surface and kind of make friends with each other like they're doing here, rather than just hanging down and kind of staying out of your way. So we've got those bottom 2 wraps together there, and in between that last 2 we just wrapped, and now both of our wires are now back in that position so that we can start adding that next bead. So both my wires, if I just hold that up, both my wires are coming out in between these 2 wires and these 2 wires, and now we can add our next bead. So just laying that down for a second, grabbing one of your wires either side, top or bottom, and what I do is I bring it down so it's almost, so it's a few inches away, and then I'll bring in the other wire, cross that through, and then bring it in so that I can kind of pull this out a little bit, and then just very gently, we don't want to overwork our wire, just very gently pull that into place. And you'll find this time, because our wires are nicely joined together by this or some tape, everything kind of sits in a lot easier and it doesn't look as awkward this time. So that bead is in place, but we still set it in with one single wrap at each side. So popping that single wrap on one wire at each side of our bead sets that in place like so. So one wrap at the bottom and one wrap at the top, and then you're just going to continue to create those wraps, 2 over 2, 2 over the top 2, 2 over the bottom 2, 2 over the top 2, and then you're in a position to start your next bead again. So I've got 2 beads in there. So there we go. And you're just going to continue this until you get to the length that you want your bracelet. So this is the piece that I've been working on, and we've got, I think there's about 26, 27 beads in this one. My original one had 29. It just depends on the the length of the bracelet you want, but we will be adding that clasp and some chain links as well, so it depends on how you want it to fit. But this is a good size for my 6-inch wrist, so it's about 26 beads. Okay, so, and I've finished, like I said when we started at the beginning, we had those 5 wraps. I finished with 5 wraps at each of this end, so we'll move on to continuing. So we don't need these weaving wires anymore, so we'll give those a snip off, and I'm snipping off more towards the outside because we don't want anything to scratch against the wrist. And then I'm just going to smooth those down, so I'm just using my pliers and smoothing those around the wire so they'll sit as nicely and as neatly without creating any catches as is possible, like so. Sorry, that went a bit blurry then. So now we can start thinking about the ends of our wires. So initially what we want to do is just start to create a little bit of a bend. Now you can use a bracelet mandrel, but you can't really use something like your wire forming pliers. So just grab those, because you'll find they're gonna sit against the bead, so that's not going to work. Although you could try and use them just on the edges, but I think just forming using the warmth of your hands, or a bracelet mandrel if you have one. Mine's just slightly out of reach, and we'll grab it towards the end. So just starting to form that round and making sure you don't form any bends in it that are unnecessary, and just kind of get to about this stage. Okay, so we're going to look at these ends. So the 0.9 wires that are sitting on the inside, I just want you to just, if I just hold them this way, just slightly pull them toward the inside like so. So these are still coming out, these are your 1.25 wires. And what we're going to do is we're going to take these into quite short loops. So I'm going to cut them around about 1 centimetre long on the inside there. So just moving all them pieces out of the way. So I've got about 1 centimetre on each of these. Then I'm going to take my bail pliers and I'm going to use the smallest mandrel, and just 2 at a time because they're going to sit in 2s. We're just going to bend these towards the inside. So just nice and gently, holding 2 nice and firm and bending those so you've got a loop towards the inside. And again, we can turn around and grab these ones and turn these nice and gently towards the inside. So now we've got matching loops on either side. Now what I've finished off with here is a loop coming in towards each side there, just so that I can attach to. So I'm going to trim these off, and I'm going to trim them off around about just over 1 inch, just about 1 inch and an eighth or something, just around about, maybe about 3 centimetres. Yeah, so these are about 3 centimetres each. So then I'm going to take the second size mandrel. So if you're using your round nose pliers, you're probably working about halfway down your round nose pliers, and just make a mark as to where you want those marks to be, so you can use the same on the opposite side. So I'm going to bend these towards the inside. Okay, so I'm going to start turning these. It's going to be a little bit awkward because we've got that other wire in the way just at the beginning there. Then I can put my pliers in this way and create that bend. So we've got that loop all the way down, like so. Now I'm going to turn this over and work on this back wire, and I want this one to match the other side. So taking this around, now this time we haven't got to worry about that other wire being in the way, and bringing this down so that these sit together. Now they won't sit perfectly at the very beginning. You're going to have to just kind of manipulate them, and what will happen is when we add that ring at the end, that will help them to stay together. So we've got 2 loops together and they sat one on top of the other. Okay, like I say, when we add the final loops, they will sit together a lot nicer. Okay, so we're going to continue our bending. So continue forming that shape. Like I said, this is a bracelet that's got this section at the back, so don't think about forming it the whole way round. It's just kind of going to sit. Let's just pop that in my wrist. it's going to sit around here. So we've almost formed that right there. Okay, so it's going to sit around about there. So I'm just going to take that off my wrist. And we're going to do the same at this side. So we're just going to pull those 0.9 wires just gently towards the inside like we did before. So those ones are pulled towards the inside there. And then I'm going to take my flush cutters and cut these down to around about a centimetre or so each, the same length as that you did on the opposite side. And then taking my smallest mandrel from my baling pliers, or whichever you have, if you're using again your round nose pliers, just mark whichever one you use. So I'm just forming those loops around at each end, bringing those around and in. So we've got loops again at this side, and we're going to do the exact same again. So we said about 3 centimetres. So you can measure these. I must admit I'm one that just goes by eye. It's just probably laziness, to be honest. But yeah, just measure them if you want to, if you want a nice perfect length for each one. So pulling these around, like I said, it's more awkward at the first one because you've got that other one in the way a little bit. But pulling these down so that you create that circle, and then we're going to work around the back and pulling this around until that comes around again. And again, we've got these circles together. Like I said, you might have to just manipulate them a little bit because they're wanting to sit at the same level, so they're kind of fighting it against each other a little bit. So it's just manipulating it until we get them to sit very nicely together, like so. So now we can start adding our clasp and extra detail. So I'll just move these out of the way and we'll work on that section. Okay, so we're going to move on to making our clasp and our chain links to connect everything together. So we'll start off with making our clasp. So I've just got a length of the 1.25 wire, so I want my clasp to be really nice and sturdy, so I'm using the thickest wire that I've got available to me. So, and to start with, we're going to make a loop to sit at the end. So we're going to come in about 1 inch and make a little kink in that wire. So we've got that inch to be working with. Now we'll be cutting some of this off. I just want to make sure that I've got a really nice loop. Okay, so I'm going to pop my pliers in here. Then I'm going to push this all the way around until it comes past. So I've taken it underneath here. So now I'm going to take my pliers off, and what I want to do is turn this over, and I want to come in with a flush cut on here. So this is going to join together beautifully. So the flush side of your pliers is the side that is flat. So this side here, so this is the side that needs to be closest to your work. If you cut with the side closest to your work being this side, you'll end up with a V and it won't be as professionally finished. So we're going to come in and make that snip in there nice and close. Move that little piece out of the way, and then you're going to come in with your flat nose or chain nose pliers and just manipulate that just so it sits as close as is possible to make a complete loop. But we do want it to open because that's how we're going to attach. Okay, so from there we're going to hold on to our wire, hold on to our little loop, and just make a little kink back, which this will be quite hard because it's quite a tough wire. So just give that a little push, and I just want a little kink back away from that. Then we're going to take our baling pliers again and moving about 1 centimetre, so leaving about 1 centimetre gap here, we're just going to take this around. This is my 6mm part of my pliers, so taking this around until it comes towards that loop, so I can reposition and just make sure I've got a nice shape in there. So now I can take my pliers out, and then holding this, I can take this and snip this around about halfway to that loop. So you might want to pull it away just very slightly. So I'm snipping this about halfway along that loop. So I'm just going to hold that. And then what you're going to do is you're going to go in with your chain nose pliers and pop a little kink just in the ends there. So this is your clasp fully made. Now if anything else I would do, I would just take a jewellery file or even an emery board and just file this tip just to round it and make sure there's nothing sharp on that there. Okay, because we've used this 1.25 wire, we don't need to hammer it because it's a really nice strong sturdy, but you could do if you really wanted to, but in my opinion it's not going to really move. Okay, so now we need to make some links. So to make some, if you haven't got jump rings that are pre-made, or if you haven't got the same colour wire that you're using, it's always nice to be able to make your own jump rings. Now I will say that saw cut jump rings are the best ones that you can get because they're going to have the best cuts and the best closure. But if you haven't got a saw, or sometimes it can be a bit tricky, I often use my baling pliers. Now what I've got here, this is the reason that we wanted the 1 mil, so I've got that little bit more strength than the 0.9 that we were using earlier. And I'm going to use this mandrel here to make some links. So I'm just going to start bringing this around and start forming this around my pliers. Now I've got that first loop. Your first loop is never going to be spot on perfect. So, and then I'm just going to start forming lots and lots of loops. So just grabbing, turning, open, grab, turn, and then I'm doing that quite quickly. So I'm going to make as many loops as I can on this part of my mandrel to form as many jump rings as I can. So there we go. So like I said, that first one is usually not as good, so we're going to snip that off like so, and I'm snipping it off with my flush closest to what's left behind. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my pliers around. So I snipped off this way, so the flush is on that side. So I'm going to turn my pliers over and snip the next ring off that way, the opposite way. Now what I need to do is snip off the very tip of the next one, because that will have that point on it. And again, flipping these around so that we've got the flush cut on each of the cuts that we actually want, snipping the end off and turning. So we've got lots of jump rings all flush cut together, making sure you nip that very end off each time. So just do one more and we should have enough. So I've got 5 jump rings there, and I've got lots of little pieces that I cut off in between, so I'll just get rid of those. Okay, so now we can start adding everything together. We can attach our clasp onto one side, so we do that by opening up this loop at the bottom here, like so. And I want my clasp to attach in this direction, so my clasp is on the outside. It's up to you which way you prefer to wear it. And then I'm just going to go in with my pliers, and you could hold the other side with some pliers, but you can just close it like so. So now we've got our clasp on one side and we can start adding our jump rings. So I'm just going to bring in another pair of pliers, and we can take one of our jump rings, take a look at it, make sure it's got a good closure on it, so just give it a wiggle together, make sure you can feel them touching together. You know that's going to be a good jump ring. So you can now open that and loop that through our 2 loops on this side. I just need to open that a little bit more because it's a thicker wire. So looped that in between there and close, making sure we give that a wiggle and we can feel those touching each other. And then adding each jump ring one at a time. So adding until you've got enough jump rings for your piece to come together. So I'll just continue adding those and then we'll take a look at the finished piece. So my bracelet is finished. I've added the rest of my links and I shaped it a little bit round my bracelet mandrel, which this one is an oval shape. You can see that there. I can't show you the whole thing because stood up because it's very, very long and heavy. So I'll just pop that to one side for a second. So yes, this is our bracelet all finished. looking beautiful, everything nice and neat and together. It's a very achievable look, even though working maybe with two weaving wires does sound a little bit daunting. It's very manageable because once you've done one side you can move the opposite side out of the way and just work on one side at a time, and they don't tend to, like I said, if you work over your lap, they don't tend to kind of mingle with each other. So this is that clasp there that we made. I added a few more extra links, so I just made some more with my mandrel and my wire. So this is the 1mm wire. Yeah, so this is your finished piece. So if you've enjoyed my demonstration today, my tutorial, please pop a like at the bottom. I really appreciate it. If you want to see more, there is lots more coming. I've got lots and lots more ideas. If you want to see more, please subscribe. That would be great, and I will see you again soon. Thank you very much for watching.